Anvil Hammer Hatchet podcast.
Welcome to AnvilHammerHatchet, where we answer all of life's questions in about an hour and a half. I'm Chris, and if you've been following recent episodes, you'll know that my co-hosts have been experiencing some health issues, some social health-related issues, I guess is a nice way to say it. And another one with some, I guess the most polite way to say it would be rectal issues. Today, that is not the case. Army, my right-hand man, and of course, Big Daddy Ross, the boss's boss, the man with the plan, who knows where to stand. Unfortunately, neither of my guys could be here with me today. So this one's going to be a unique one. I'm going to be doing this one solo. So Jason Ficus, either tap out now or strap yourself in, because for you, buddy, this is probably going to be a long one. Since I couldn't be with my co-host today, I'm recording from a unique location, a bunker located deep beneath the heart of the city. The reason I'm broadcasting from this location is this is where my laboratory is located, and I've been doing some experimentation in the last couple of weeks. Some experimentation with human cloning. Now, I know you might be thinking that human cloning is illegal, but I did receive a special government dispensation to perform these experiments, and in the last 2 weeks or so, I've had some success. And considering the experiments that I was doing, what they entailed, the small level of biological waste material that was necessary to achieve these results was definitely worth it. And the end result is someone who's sitting in as my co-host today. I recently acquired some genetic material from Army Armstrong, gathered from an empty beer can that he had left in the studio. And with that genetic material, I was able to clone a co-host. He's only a few days old, and I'd like to introduce everybody to my friend who I've named Klarmy. He is my clone army. Say hello, buddy.
Hello.
What has it been, about 4 days or so since we've been spending time together, hanging out, teaching you, showing you the ways of life?
I should know that, but I don't.
Well, that's okay. I don't expect you to know everything, man. You're only a few days old. Considering you're a clone of a person that's close to me, I think you're doing a pretty good job.
Isn't that a fucking orc?
No, an orc. I feel like I've been over this with Army as well. An orc is a combination of a pig and a person. It's a fictional character from Dungeons and Dragons. I think their skin is normally green. You are not an orc. You are a person, or the closest thing I could come up with to a person to help me host the show today. So, I hope you're feeling comfortable in the co-pilot seat. This should be an interesting little experiment. I know your vocabulary is still fairly limited because you're only a few days old. How many words have you learned at this point?
I should know that, but I don't.
That's okay. It's not super important. We don't need a word count or a Klarmy dictionary at this point. I just needed somebody to sort of help me steer the ship since I'm doing this one by myself. And I'm also going to need somebody to hang out with on the break, because if I'm just sitting around on the break by myself, it's going to get a little sad, to be honest. So me and you, buddy, till the wheels fall off. This should be fun. As I said, I don't expect you to contribute a whole lot. So where to begin? On this show, we talk a lot about music, but we also talk about movies. We talk about shows we're watching, whether it's on television or Netflix. We've covered a few books, audiobooks, whatever, basic media, your general random forms of entertainment. And what I've been entertaining myself with lately is the new Netflix original series Iron Fist, which is part of the Marvel Universe. It's the fourth installment of the Marvel shows. There was Daredevil, there was Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, and the fourth installment is Iron Fist. These are all preludes to the team-up series that they're going to be doing that is called The Defenders. The Defenders is a comic book franchise. It's been around for a long time. It did not originally focus on these characters. I believe over time they have been in and out. And I'm assuming based on the way that Marvel seems to tailor their universe around their film and television properties, they're probably in the comic now. The original characters were, I believe, Doctor Strange, the Silver Surfer, the Hulk, a completely different cast of characters. Although I wouldn't be surprised down the road if Doctor Strange didn't make an appearance, considering Benedict Cumberbatch is the actor in the Marvel Universe who's playing Doctor Strange. It would probably cost them a pretty penny to get him on board. Maybe as their value and stock prices do increase and they have more disposable income, they can afford somebody of Benedict Cumberbatch's caliber to get him on board in a TV show. I'm sure they will at the very least be referring to Doctor Strange, which they can do since it is all one Marvel universe and it is all Marvel properties. But they've retailored the series to include those 4 main characters. So far, I've seen all 4 series. I've enjoyed them all. I'm not completely done with Iron Fist at this point. I have a couple of episodes left. And to be honest, at this point, it is my least favorite of the 4, which is extremely disappointing to me because growing up as a child reading comic books, being a comic book fan as a kid and a collector as I got older, Iron Fist has always been one of my favorite characters. He is essentially the Marvel Universe's version of Bruce Lee, even though he is Caucasian. I've heard a lot of people complaining about the fact that they cast a white actor in the role of Iron Fist because it is a very Asian-themed series. There were complaints that this show was continuing the whitewashing, as it's being called, of Hollywood. At the end of the day, Iron Fist is a fish-out-of-water story. And so if you cast an Asian actor in that role, in order to maintain the theme and concept of the show, you then need to recast all the surrounding actors with people of a different ethnicity. So in the whitewashing of the Marvel Universe, which, by the way, originally the character as written was a Caucasian guy. If you change that around, you would basically be eliminating roles for dozens of Asian actors who surround him to give the story the credence of the fish out of water tale. If they had cast an Asian actor and just done away with the whole fish out of water story, what you would then end up with would be complaints that it was stereotyping, that it's a complete stereotype that all Asians know karate, and basically you were using social stereotypes to exploit an Asian actor. And then if you chose to cast an actor of a completely different ethnicity, then you would be accused of pandering. So basically, it was lose-lose. They chose to stick with the original storyline. I don't want to spoil the story, so I'm not going to go into detail about what happens in the story, but essentially they stuck with the original formula. What they did not stick with is the canon of the Iron Fist comic books. They changed the backstory. There is a lot of revisionist history going on in this show, or at least that I've seen so far. They may go back and include a lot of the information that they've thus far omitted, but at this point in the story and the direction it's taking in, I don't see how they would go about doing that. There's a lot of focus on peripheral characters that are sort of B stories and C stories that unfortunately seem to fill out about half of the show. I definitely would have liked to see it more concisely focused on Iron Fist, on the character, his backstory, his development, and what he's all about. From what I've seen so far, it's about 50-50. And quite frankly, the B and C stories read more like a legal drama. There's a lot of boardroom scenes and CEO meetings and corporate lawyers and things like that that don't really do a whole lot to push a kung fu story forward. I don't recall any scenes like that in the old Bruce Lee movies in the 70s that I fell in love with.
Roger that.
And quite frankly, were one of the reasons that I was drawn to Iron Fist as a kid when I saw him in the comic books. There were a few key issues in my childhood that to this day still stand out to me. One of them being X-Men number 171. It was, I remember buying it, and that was when I found X-Men number 172. and noticed by the numbering in the upper left-hand corner that they were sequential stories and that there was a long view story that I could follow. That's when I really sort of dove into collecting comics. But even before that, as a kid, I was into comics, and there were some key issues that really stood out. And one of them was the first issue of Power Man and Iron Fist. One of the things that drew me to that was the Iron Fist character and how he resembled in his costuming and styling and behavior of a martial arts movie character. And as a kid, I was really into kung fu movies. There was a show that used to come on the weekends really, really late, inappropriately late for somebody my age to have been staying up and watching it, but I did. There were two of them, actually, now that I think of it. There was Kung Fu Gold and Kung Fu Theater. And I used to force myself as a little kid to stay up late enough to watch those kung fu movies back in the 70s. And I was in love with them. I took martial arts basically because I was so infatuated with those movies. And when I saw a character that seemed to embody that style and feel in comic books, being also a fan of comic books, I was immediately drawn to it, and I've been a fan of Iron Fist as a character ever since. So I had really, really high hopes for this show. And thus far, like I said, it is good. I wanted it to be better. I wanted it to be the best of the four. And unfortunately, it was not. If I had to rank them, gun to my head at this point, Daredevil was definitely my favorite. Luke Cage and Jessica Jones it's kind of neck and neck. Both were incredible, but they're very different stories. So it's really difficult to rank them side by side. Jessica Jones is more of a detective story. Luke Cage is more of an underdog story. So the two things are so different and so hard to compare even as shows that it's really hard for me to say which one of them I enjoyed more. There is a lot of crossover between Jessica Jones and Luke Cage. The characters show up in both shows. In the first couple of runs of Daredevil, it felt a lot more independent of that universe, even though it does take place in the same realm and the characters are referred to in each show. There are mentions of the characters from the other shows within each series to sort of remind you that these shows all take place in the same world. In the comic books, a character that's referred to as the Night Nurse. In the shows, her name is Claire Temple. She's played by Rosario Dawson, and she is the one through line in all those shows that kind of ties them all together. Essentially, when you see the Night Nurse, quote unquote, when you see Claire, you know, or are at the very least reminded that these shows all take place in the same world. And like I said, unfortunately, Iron Fist is thus far the weakest. But what it does do is tie them all together in a neat little bow as a prelude for the Defenders. At this point, there's actually been a lot of potential setup for what the Defenders is going to be. I haven't heard a whole lot. I don't know if they're even filming at this point. I don't know if scripts or plots are in place, but there have been a lot of villains or groups of villains that have crossed over between those series. So at this point, it's kind of hard to even speculate what the overall story arc of the Defender series is going to be, other than it is going to include all four of the main characters from those Marvel series. The bottom line, though, on those Marvel series is that as a whole, as a group, when you put them all together, they've created a fantastic, very entertaining, very intriguing universe that is really fun to follow. If you keep up with all four and you hear those little mentions of people from other shows, other characters, events or situations that happened in the other series, you sort of feel like you're kind of on the inside. It feels sort of like a wink and a nod to the fans of the show. They're a lot of fun, and I'm really excited to see where the Defenders goes from all that. Hopefully there will be an appearance by the Punisher. In season 2 of Daredevil, John Barenthal portrayed the Punisher, who is an iconic character that is very beloved by fans. And when word came out that he was going to be included in Daredevil, a lot of fans got really nervous because the Punisher has been poorly done or wrongly done many times in the past. The one example I can think of where he was done right is a very underrated movie. It was called Punisher Warzone, but I think because fans had been disillusioned by missteps in the past, a lot of people didn't even bother to watch it. And it was the closest interpretation to the comic book version of the Punisher that I had seen. up until John Barenthal brought the Punisher to the Daredevil series in the new Marvel Universe on Netflix. That was not only a spot-on interpretation, but an excellent performance. That is the Punisher from the comic books. That is Frank Castle. It was fantastic. If you have not watched season 2 or any of Daredevil, I would highly recommend you do it. It's very entertaining. It frames the world in a very believable way. You know, the key to watching any movie or any television that is fantasy or action or whatever the genre may be, one of the big keys is suspension of disbelief. With comic book TV shows, it's very difficult to get past the suspension of disbelief because it's so far beyond reality. Fortunately, the Christopher Nolan Batman series and the Robert Downey Jr. portrayal of Iron Man, the Chris Evans portrayal of Captain America, a lot of our willingness as viewers to sort of put aside reality and accept the suspension of disbelief and just go with it has increased a lot. So we're a lot more forgiving as viewers at this point, so it's easier for us to just sort of dive into that world. And in those Marvel series, especially Daredevil, they did a great job of letting you sort of put reality aside and just go with it and enjoy. And if you watch Daredevil, you fall into their world fairly quickly. And once you get over that hump that this blind guy has extra senses and can fight crime and decide to just go with it, it is quite the roller coaster. It's a great show, and an occurrence that is actually very rare in television or in any storytelling genre is the second season kind of outshone the first. Instead of resting on their laurels and going with the flow, they decided to take it up a notch. Actually, they decided to take it up 2 or 3 notches. Season 2 was incredible. So I would highly recommend you sit down and watch Daredevil season 1 and 2. It's obviously streaming on Netflix. And if you do, I do think you'll get roped into that world enough that you'll want to sit down and watch Jessica Jones because you know it takes place there. You'll want to watch Luke Cage because it takes place there. As a quick aside, this is still Anvil Hammer Hatchet, so we go off on wild tangents when I'm doing the show with the guys. Just because it's Clarmy and I here doing the show together doesn't mean that that's not going to be the case.
Roger that.
As a quick aside, the soundtrack in Iron Fist is actually serving as kind of a character, and there is a reason I'm bringing this up, so bear with me. In the story, the main character has been missing for 15 years. So he returns to New York City after 15 years of being away. He's still a young guy, so he was a kid when he disappeared. And one of the only things he has with him from when he left is his iPod. So that would have been an iPod from around 2002. So the soundtrack of the show is filled with music that was popular in 2002, and it kind of lends a strange feeling of the lapse of time in this guy's life. And like I said, it does sort of serve as an additional character. There's a lot of hip hop from the early 2000s, and even in the fight scenes, the techno music that sort of has to go with fight scenes in movies is techno or electronic music from the early 2000s. It's more drum and bass, jungle. It's not dubstep and the kind of stuff you would hear in an action scene now. So they utilize music to really create a vibe in the show and give the show a feel. The reason I bring that up is in Luke Cage, that was extremely focused upon. You could see that they intended the music to really play a role in the story, from using Wu-Tang Clan songs during the fight scenes so that as soon as you heard Wu-Tang drop, you knew things were about to get real. That was one way that they utilized the soundtrack. Each episode had a song that it sort of centralized around. There was a nightclub that a lot of the series took place in, where they would have in the sort of behind the scenes backgrounds where these gangsters were holding their meetings, there would be people on stage in the club auditioning sort of in the background. And so you would hear their music, and it really gave a sense of Harlem, to my knowledge. I've never been to Harlem. My only exposure to Harlem at all is through media. So as a kid seeing, movies and television shows that took place in Harlem in New York, I constructed an idea of what Harlem was like. And I think a lot of people probably have more of an idea than an experience of what Harlem is like. And they utilize the soundtrack to really give you the feel of the Harlem in your mind. Very culturally centered, musically centered, artistically centered, sort of a jumping off place for cool. Harlem sort of acted as a character, and the music definitely acted as a character, so much so that I don't even hesitate to speculate that it was very intentional. And the reason I bring that up is that show, it was in Luke Cage episode number 5, that an artist was performing to an empty club, clearly auditioning to perform there, doing an amazing hip-hop song. So good that I took a step back and went and looked up who the artist was, found out the name of the song, looked into it on YouTube, and found out that it was this artist named Jidenna, who I then started looking even deeper into and really grew to enjoy his music. So that show led me to an artist that I really like. Jidenna is amazing. The song in episode 5 of the first season of Luke Cage is called Long Live the Chief, and it is an amazing track. It has a very old school vibe, but the music that's behind it is very intense and aggressive. I don't want to say it's industrial, and it's definitely not dubstep, but it's got an aggressive tone that you don't find in a lot of hip hop, especially today. It's not an understated beat. The lyrics are definitely not understated. Lyrically, it has a way more old school vibe than a lot of hip hop coming out. As a matter of fact, he has a single called Classic Man that he did a remix of that features Kendrick Lamar, who is a very current artist. So it's very current. When I say it's old school, I mean more of the themes and the tone of the music. It has that egotism of hip hop in the 90s. His focus is more on being intelligent rather than focusing on physical prowess or anything like that. He's a great artist. A lot of variety in his style. All of his songs sound very different from one another. He uses a lot of different styles of beats to perform over. He's really great, really talented. I would highly recommend that you check him out. As a matter of fact, I will post links to some of his videos, or at least to one of his videos, on the website when I post this episode, so you can check Jidenna out. It's Jidenna. And he's an amazing artist who I haven't really heard a whole lot about. But if you want to check him out, a really simple way to do it is just watch the series Luke Cage, and when you get to episode 5, check the musician who's playing in the background. You'll hear Jidenna, and that, like I said, that episode was the thing that led me to look into him in the first place. Really talented, really great. Speaking of Kendrick Lamar, that's another artist that I've been listening to a lot. I haven't really been listening to a whole lot of hip hop for a while. I did an episode with Low Grit a few weeks ago, and just talking to him about production somehow led to the conversation of hip hop, and really sort of inspired me to start checking out hip hop again. I've been finding a lot of artists that I was sleeping on for a long time, or just hadn't gotten around to checking out yet. And so I've been listening to a lot of hip hop lately, and really enjoying a lot of the new stuff that's coming out. So, as far as entertainment goes, this week I've really been doing a lot of Iron Fist and a lot of hip hop. As well as hip hop, I've been listening to a lot of High on Fire, a lot of Fu Manchu, and checking out the bands that Pandora will propagate your playlist with when you type in a specific artist. There's a band called Electric Wizard that I found because of Pandora that's amazing. Orange Goblin is another band that's really good. Electric Wizard, though, they're very hard, very heavy, but also very psychedelic. You almost don't expect a band that heavy to be that trippy and weird, and the way they use their effects pedals and stuff to create an ambient vibe over this hard, aggressive rock is really cool. So, that's one of the neat things about Pandora or Spotify or the services like that, is because you're not just loading an album or playing a playlist. You type in the one artist that you do know you're familiar with and that you do like, and it really leads you down a path to new artists that you might have never discovered before. So I've been trying to look more into those bands that Pandora is leading me to, and finding some really, really cool stuff. Pandora, I would say, lately has been my primary music streaming service. Lately, I've actually been listening to a lot of garage rock as well as hip hop. It's very different, very complete other end of the spectrum. And there's a lot of great stuff from that era. The Trogs, the Sonics. It's got a really punk rock sound to it. And it's strange that that was almost like mainstream music for rock and roll during that time. But you listen to it now, and it's not that far removed from the Stooges. I mean, Paul Revere and the Raiders, these were bands that were appearing on talk shows. You know, essentially, they were what kids were listening to that listened to mainstream rock and roll. And when you go back and listen to it now, it still sounds really like fresh and vibrant. So, you know, if you are looking for something different but reminiscent of stuff you grew up on, check out garage rock. And an easy way to do that is in whatever your streaming service is, just plug in it's the number, it's not spelled out, 13th 13th floor elevators. And they have some great music, and you'll actually be surprised how much of it you recognize. Songs that you've known for a long time and been hearing forever and just didn't know who they were. You'll hear that song, look over into it, and it's really great stuff. Being somebody who grew up with punk rock and proto-punk, you know, your Iggy and the Stooges, your MC5, things like that, it has a really similar feel. So it's really cool to get something that has that vibe, but it's not stuff that you've heard into the ground. It's a fresh batch of new music that has that same feel and vibe to it and sound to it. So yeah, good stuff. I'd highly recommend it. Question Mark and the Mysterians is another one of those types of bands that you may have heard of. All right, so that means it's break time. So Clarmy and I are going to take a little break, see if we can't change the vibe of it.
Hello.
Hi, Clarmy. All right, let's go take a break, see if we can't reset the vibe. Are you excited about your first break?
I should know that, but I don't.
Yeah, there's no way to really know until we take the break, Clarny. Anyway, all right, so we're going to take a break. We'll be back. Hang tight, guys. This one should be interesting, to say the least. And we are back from break. Well, I have to admit, that break kind of felt more like school than it did like a break. I feel like I was having to explain a lot of things to you, like the difference between a person and a pig and an orc.
Isn't that a fucking orc?
No, orcs are not real. I thought we just went over this several times. What were you doing? I mean, I had a couple of drinks on the break. I got a little loose, I have to admit, you know, on the breaks. The idea is that we sort of change the feeling, change the vibe of the show. But what exactly were you doing? You were a little out of hand.
Marijuana, ecstasy.
We weren't even on break that long. All of that in that short of a period of time. Do you think that's a really good idea?
I should know that, but I don't.
For the love of God, Clarmy. Anyway, all right. Well, that being taken into consideration, I won't expect a whole lot of feedback or input from you for this next segment. Man, you know, for being 4 days old, you do go a little hard in the paint. I don't know if that's the best idea, do you?
I should know that, but I don't.
All right. Anyway, I'm back. I'm here with Clarmy.
Hello.
You don't have to say hello every time. Everybody knows you're here. Sorry, buddy. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. You're just a youngster. It's fine.
Marijuana, ecstasy.
Yeah, that'll do it. That'll definitely do it. Anyway, so we took a little break. Clarmy and I went and tried to sort of reset things, change the vibe like we do on AnvilHammerHatchet. And I was sort of going over in my head what I was going to talk about in the next segment. You know, without the normal conversational flow, it's not as easy just to sort of let things go on their own and sort of let the conversation take you where it's going to take you. So this is actually requiring something that I'm really not used to doing, and that's work. So I had to put a little thought into what I'm going to talk about. For one thing, you guys may have noticed the absence this week of our signature segment.
Don't be CBA.
And there's a reason for that. I scoured last week's episode looking for errors, Googling, fact-checking, and couldn't really find any except for one glaring mistake. And that's why I was looking so deep to find anything else that we could correct, because that one mistake was mine. And it's a doozy. And I'm not going to go over it here by myself because it's definitely a big enough one that I feel like I need to be in with the boys so I can take my proper beating. So the next time I'm in with the real army and Big Daddy Ross, the boss's boss, that's when I'll if you noticed it and you're sitting there grinding your teeth because I'm not addressing it, don't worry, I will get to it. I am aware. I know what a ridiculous mistake it was. And I will address it in its entirety. But I definitely feel like I need to be there with the guys so that they can give me the proper beating I deserve for it. So don't worry, next week we will have
Don't be CBA.
And I will put it out there and I will take full responsibility for the mistake that I made. It's a big one. And what's really strange about it is when I said it with all earnestness and still have the thoughts and memories that led me to make that mistake, which is even more bizarre. But yeah, so next time I'm back in with the guys, we will have the segment. I will address my mistake and I will let the beating begin.
Fight!
Yeah, so that's coming. Oh, and I totally forgot to mention, we are now available on iTunes. So that's yet another platform that you can listen to the show. So that makes Google Play, iTunes, SoundCloud for the most recent episode and the one from the week previous. And you can also stream the show on YouTube. So we're getting the show out there. And it's pretty exciting. We've gotten some feedback and it's all pretty good. I think that Clarmy...
Hello.
Hi, Clarmy. I was saying, we're getting out there and we're getting some good feedback. I think that's pretty exciting for me and for the guys. And I
should know that, but I don't.
I know, Clarmy. There's a lot of things that you don't know. It's fine. Anyway, moving on from that, we found out this week that we were available on iTunes. So at this point, if you want, you can just Google us. If you just Google AnvilHammerHatchet, it's all one word. The results will come up. There's a link to the iTunes there, as well as the social media links and stuff. Unless you just want to go to AnvilHammerHatchet.com. All the social media links are across the top of the page, so it's really easy just to click there, jump to the site, like, favor, follow, subscribe, whatever. If you want to give us a call, you can just click the Google Voice phone link at the top of the page and leave us a voicemail if you have any questions or anything you want us to address on the show, any topics you would like us to cover. Call the number, leave me a voicemail. I check them regularly. Let us know and we'll cover any topic you want. Also, we've updated the picture gallery on the website on AnvilHammerHatchet.com. There's photos that are pretty much associated with each show, some more than others. Last week's show with Don Roland, who was a wonderful guest. He was really amazing to have in and really fun episode. He had some great stories, good conversations, good topics, a lot of insight on being a touring musician. Don was an amazing guest. And obviously, since we had a guest in, there's more photos than clearly there will be on this episode, since it's just me and Clarmy. And Clarmy, since he's so new out of the tank, his skin's very sensitive. He's actually photosensitive, so we won't have any photos available of him. So gallery for this episode's going to be a little light. But you want to see some cool pictures, check out the gallery that's associated with last week's episode with Don Roland, who was our special guest. The episode was called The Sound That's in My Head. So if you just go to that episode and look at the pictures, there's pictures of some of the guitars that Don talked about. He had a story about a certain area in Germany that had a very unusual sign. There's a picture of that up there, a flyer from the bands that Don and Army were in when they were younger. So yeah, we kind of try and keep the gallery topical, at least to what the episode was about. So there's photos of us before, during, and after the show, and there's usually some photos of the chaos that was left behind after our breaks. So yeah, cool pictures. It's just fun stuff to see. So that gallery's been updated. this week's will be light. But, moving forward with all the episodes, those galleries will be getting bigger and bigger. So, yeah, it's just, another fun way to kind of interact with the show. So, yeah, check this out. Let us know what you think.
Moving forward.
Oh, I'm sorry. Am I boring you? If I can't keep you entertained, I definitely don't know how I'm going to keep the listeners entertained when it's pretty much just me.
What a prick.
Well, I'm not understating your contributions, but I just mean I am kind of having to do a lot of the heavy lifting for the show this week.
Roger that.
Okay, well, at least you're understanding. And you're right. Let's move on to a more entertaining topic. Before the break, I mentioned the genre of garage rock. And a big band, I think I even said to plug into Pandora to get to garage rock, to plug in the 13th Floor Elevators. And they're an amazing band and were really influential on music in general, as well as the whole garage rock scene. Garage rock is kind of a misnomer. People called it that because they envisioned teenagers gathering together in their family garage to rehearse and play and learn their instruments. But a lot of the musicians in those bands were professional musicians, older guys, not necessarily teenagers either. So the idea that they were these youngsters in garages was kind of misleading. But that's sort of the descriptive term that eventually became used to describe that music. At the time, it was more referred to as just psychedelic rock. A big influence on that music sound was the psychedelic movement, the hippie movement, and quite frankly, drugs. Drugs were definitely a big part of it. The 13th Floor Elevators, their frontman, a guy named Rocky Erickson, was actually a big proponent of psychedelics and of drug use and very vocal about it. And as a consequence, became kind of the 13th Floor Elevators are from Texas. They're from Austin. And Texas has really, really strict drug laws. And so Rocky Erickson, the frontman of the Elevators, became kind of a target. He was actually eventually arrested, I believe, for one joint and was looking at prison time. He ended up pleading insanity or at least claiming mental illness. And so instead of going to prison, he was committed to a psychiatric institution where he received electroshock therapy that he never recovered from. The guy was never right after that. There's a documentary called You're Gonna Miss Me. It's named after their first single, which is an incredible song. It's a great song. But it's a documentary that is actually, it's really dark. It's kind of, not even kind of, it's very sad. And it deals with him in his current state, what led him to that state. There's a lot of history about the band, and there's also a lot of great music in it. But as a watch, when you're viewing it, you will feel a lot of different emotions: sadness, anger. It's really interesting. You'll feel frustration, but ultimately, the guy was an amazing artist. It's really amazing to watch how he's very dysfunctional. Rocky Erickson, that is very dysfunctional in his day-to-day life. But when he picks up a guitar, you would never know that there's anything wrong with him. All the chords are there. The lyrics are there to the songs he's written. When he plays, he is spot on. That is the realm that he's actually normal and functional. And he's very lucid in those moments. Compared to his day-to-day state, it's night and day. It's black and white. The guy was actually very influential on a lot of musicians, most notably in my mind to Billy Gibbons of ZZ Top, who then went on to be incredibly influential to a lot of other different musicians and a lot of other genres. Josh Homme cites him as an influence. Elaine Jorgensen from Ministry, Lemmy from Motorhead, Dimebag from Pantera cited Billy Gibbons as a major influence in his playing. So you can't really downplay the importance of Billy Gibbons in rock and roll on how many different people he's influenced. As a matter of fact, I'm just going to say don't sleep on ZZ Top. They're a great band. If you have any misconceptions or preconceptions about ZZ Top, thinking that's not your style of music, you're not into that kind of rock and roll, that sort of classic blues-based rock, do yourself a favor, check out ZZ Top. As musicians, they're incredible. For a three-piece band, they have a very full sound. technically they're super proficient, but ultimately they're just great songwriters. So whether you think you're into them or not, check out ZZ Top, and if nothing else, focus on Billy Gibbons playing. He's a maestro when it comes to the guitar. And his style, supposedly, according to him, he's in that documentary, interviewed a lot about Rocky Erickson and what a big influence the 13th Floor Elevators were on him and on ZZ Top. So check out Billy Gibbons. And again, it's not really uplifting, but watch that documentary. It's very informative about the 13th Floor Elevators as well as the garage scene in general. And like I said, there is a ton of bands that sort of fall under that umbrella that are great musicians with great songs that you've heard your whole life and you didn't even realize who they were. I would absolutely check out the Sonics. They're a good example. They're a Seattle band from back in the day. This was all stuff that was being recorded and released back in the late 60s. There was actually a really small window where garage rock was being, or what is called garage rock, was being produced. And at the time, the record industry was very different right now. And more importantly, the radio industry was very different. Now, most radio stations that are successful are syndicated nationally. So you find the same stations and the same music no matter where you go in America. Back then, there was more focus on regional radio. And so there were bands that would blow up locally by getting local radio play. So these guys were rock stars in a couple of states or however far the broadcast signals were traveling. So these guys were kind of local celebrities, and they would have Battle of the Bands contests where if you won that, then some other radio station would a larger one would organize a national Battle of the Bands. And so some of these guys got famous thanks to just getting their songs on local radio. The 13th Floor Elevators actually were on American Bandstand at one point, so they sort of made it to a national level, but they had a very short career. I think they only had 3 albums. And I believe the last album did not include Rocky Erickson on more than 2 songs, if I'm not mistaken, because of his mental condition and the incident that had happened when he was committed to the mental institution as opposed to going to prison. So, it's a sad story. It's a short story. And Rocky Erickson is still alive. And there was a resurgence in the interest in garage music over the last few decades that kind of revitalized Rocky Erickson's life and career, brought his music back to the forefront. But on a local level and a regional level in that area that kind of spread like a virus throughout America, the 13th Floor Elevators were very influential on that psychedelic rock sound. Something that is commonly associated with their sound is the use of effects, which is kind of strange because their guitar is actually relatively clean. But garage bands, sort of as a rule, have really fuzzed out guitar and use a lot of effects to sort of generate a really weird, trippy, psychedelic vibe. One of the strangest things about 13th Floor Elevators was they included a jug as an instrument. Now, I know that sounds weird, but the jug band, that's like a real thing. And one of the guys who was in the 13th Floor Elevators, that was his instrument of choice. So he played a jug by blowing into it, ran it through an amplifier, and got a very strange sound. If you listen to them, you'll hear this. It's almost like a warbling of a bird. It's very hard to identify what it is. As a matter of fact, I couldn't figure out what it was until I saw a video of them. And it's this guy playing the jug. And they have an association with the psychedelic movement, which is, again, sort of associated with a real fuzzed out psychedelic guitar. And a lot of really trippy, like time-based effects or phase-based effects. But another thing that's associated with that style of music, and the two in my head sort of don't really converge, but they do when you listen to this type of music. There's a lot of harmonica and tambourine, as well as, like I said, in that particular case, the jug. And that's sort of coupled with this really hard rock guitar sound. But for whatever reason, it works, and it sounds really great. Very unique, and definitely very punk rock. For the time that it was appearing on the national music stage, a decade before the punk rock movement ever really sort of made it to the forefront or was even conceived at that point. garage rock or psychedelic rock was definitely the forward-thinking music that punk rock would later become. In order to achieve that style, the guitar sound was sort of a center point, and they would use a variety of different effects. They would use phasers that kind of had a warbly vibrating sound to your guitar signal. They would use flangers, which kind of give a whooshing sound to your guitar. Makes it sound like it's sort of sweeping back and forth through the noise spectrum. They would use delays, which obviously create a very trippy psychedelic sound, which is sort of integral to the psychedelic sound and to garage music. They would use reverbs that would give this loud, gigantic, cavernous sound to their signal, make things sound really big and ominous. And then obviously the most notable effect that they would use would be the fuzz pedal to make the guitar sound really aggressive and distorted, really intimidating and bold. The fuzz is probably the most commonly associated effect with the garage rock sound. And then if you combine all those, you get this really bizarre psychedelic sound that, especially under the influence of psychedelic drugs, is very unique and surreal. So garage definitely does have a very specific sound. It's kind of a throughput to their music. And to me, it's one of the greatest sounds. As a matter of fact, my pedal board for my guitars, the guitar sound that I always go for is really reminiscent of that garage rock sound. All my pedals are Electro-Harmoix pedals, except for my wah pedal. My wah pedal is actually a Dunlop Crybaby. It's sort of the classic wah, probably one of the most commonly used wah pedals out there. Aside from that particular pedal, all my pedals are Electro-Harmoix. I use a Soul Preacher, which is a compressor, kind of stabilizes your sound a little bit, gives you more control of the volume and the levels. I've got a boost pedal called an OD Glove. It's actually sort of a boost/overdrive. The, of course, classic, probably the most commonly used fuzz pedal out there is the Big Muff. And I've got a Big Muff Pi Nano, which is essentially the original Big Muff with a much smaller footprint. But the tone you get is essentially the same. Got a Small Stone phaser and a Neo Mistress flanger. The delay I use is a Memory Toy, which is basically a shrunken down version of the Memory Man delay pedal, which is sort of a classic. Holy Grail reverb and a 360 loop pedal, which allows you to record loops on the fly and then play over them so you can create a layered sound. So, I mean, that's essentially the pedal board I've got. And with those particular pedals, you can really get that signature garage sound really easily. And these are classic pedals that have been used from the garage bands back in that era of the 60s. David Gilmour of Pink Floyd used the larger version of the Neo Mistress. He uses a Big Muff. He uses their reverbs. They're great pedals. And I run those through primarily Orange amps. It's a British amp company. They have a great high gain sound when that signal distorts on their higher gain settings. It's got an amazing sound that's really bold and loud, and it's really got a classic feel to it. And their clean channels are really transparent. So if you're playing clean, the signal of your guitar sounds really true to what your guitar inherently sounds like. I love Orange amps. I've been a huge fan of theirs for a long time. And a lot of their higher end amps are kind of pricey. And it took me a while to actually get a couple of Orange amps. But I'm so happy I have them. They're amplifiers that I've wanted for years and years and years. And was finally able to get that sound that I always wanted to get. And that sound that I wanted was really commonly found in that old garage rock. You can find that sound, those tones in old punk rock, in old hard rock, acid rock, heavy metal. It's just the sound I always wanted to make with the guitar. I actually started playing guitar really late. I was in like my mid-30s when I started playing guitar. The first instrument I think I picked up was, oddly enough, the trombone, of all things, which is cool. I mean, the horn sections have had a huge place in music throughout history, and I wanted to learn to play the sax. So I joined the school band, and there weren't any other positions available to play the saxophone. The one position that was available was the trombone. And I learned a little bit. I did try and play it. Didn't really enjoy it that much, and I put it down fairly quickly and didn't pick up another instrument for a couple of years when I picked up the bass. And I loved the bass. I played it for a while. I couldn't say I got proficient or even good at it, but I did like it a lot, and it definitely influenced my ear for music. I gravitate towards bass lines, towards rhythms. A big part of music for me is the rhythm section, the drums, the bass, the groove of the song. But I never took any lessons and wouldn't say at that point that I got any good at it. As a matter of fact, when I had an opportunity in high school to join bands, because I'm really lazy, the easiest thing for me to do was vocals. It was punk rock, required very little talent, just a lot of motivation and a lot of inspiration. And I did sing for quite a few punk bands and really enjoyed it. I'd say as a teenager, with the arrogance and overconfidence and self-indulgence that comes with being a teenager, being a vocalist kind of came naturally to me. I was definitely a bit of an attention whore, so being out front and being the guy screaming at people in front of the musicians definitely appealed to me when I was 15, 16, 17 years old. Eventually, I stopped pursuing that and just sort of abandoned any real musical aspirations that I had. I got back into music in a really sort of roundabout, obtuse way. It started more with computers than anything else. I got a computer, this is in the late 90s when personal computing became a very affordable and natural thing for everybody to do. And I became aware of audio recording software. So I started experimenting with that and found that I could make music without any real knowledge or training, so to speak. I could program more than it was playing. So I got into doing electronic music, playing more with software than anything else, and definitely found that I had an ability to do that. So I was making songs I think the first real legitimate piece of software I got was Cakewalk, which would later on evolve to become Sonar. I got fairly proficient with that, learned my way around its interface, and a friend of mine turned me on to Logic. This was back before Apple had acquired Logic and made it a part of their software suite. So I started working with that and did a lot of production with that. Kind of trip hop stuff, hip hop things, beats with a lot of samples. I, at one point, took some samples of Miles Davis's trumpet, chopped them up into individual notes, and assigned those to keys on a MIDI control keyboard, and was able to sort of play Miles Davis as an instrument. And was able to get a really cool trumpet sound from that without repeating the part that Miles Davis did. This was not just looping a Miles sample. This was, in a way, playing Miles as an instrument. And I got some really cool results from that. And at a certain point, I was looking to do similar things with guitar. So I was looking for, and bass, as a matter of fact. So I was looking to sample guitar tracks, bass tracks, and chop them up and play them like you would play a keyboard, the same way I did with the Miles Davis samples. And a friend of mine, this guy who was a hip-hop producer at the time, said, dude, if you want to get realistic bass samples, just buy a bass, which at the time seemed so far out of the realm of possibilities because I would need to learn to play it. A few years later, I saw a Nine Inch Nails live performance where Trent Reznor, on one track, he was essentially using his guitar not as a guitar, but as an effects trigger. So he was using it to trigger phasers and delays and distortions and basically create these ambient soundscapes with the guitar signal as the primary audio input. And when I was watching that, I thought, I could do that. I could use the guitar just to generate a signal and then more play with the effects than anything else. That's more what I was looking to do. So I did a little research, found a guitar that had a USB interface so I could plug it directly into the computer. You'll have to forgive any background noise. As I mentioned earlier, I am broadcasting from a bunker deep under the city, and my lab is here. So I do have lab assistants in the background who are currently conducting the experiments that I've set into place to try and institute a full cast of characters that are clones. That's not funny. I'm not even really joking around. I need a vacation. I'm tired, man. I do this a lot, and this is not my full-time job. So obviously, we all need a break, man.
Roger that.
Yeah, I figured you would, with you being a whole 4 days old, you would be aware of the need for a break.
What a prick.
I'm not being a prick. I'm just saying that between my regular jobby job and doing this full time, trying to move this forward, it gets a little tiring, and eventually I'm gonna need a break.
Moving forward.
Fine. Okay, sorry I'm boring you. Am I complaining too much? Is that the problem?
I'm completely naked.
What?
I just need to lay down.
Dude, that's totally inappropriate. You can't. Never mind. I'm going to ignore that. You go fix that. Don't bring it up again until that's resolved. That's not appropriate, dude. I don't care how old you are. You can't do that. Not in the studio.
Marijuana, ecstasy.
Dude, that is not an excuse. Just go put some pants on and come back when you've taken care of the situation. It's not funny.
I just need to lay down.
Then go lay down. Get some rest. Do whatever you got to do. Just for the love of God, put some fucking pants on. Hopefully, Clarmy's going to get dressed. Jesus Christ, I can't believe this is my life. As I was saying, so I figured, hey, here's an idea. I'll learn to play the chords. I'll record those samples, load them onto a keyboard, and then play the guitar through the keyboard. It would have this great, realistic guitar sound. And I figured I could do the same thing with the bass. So I started learning to play the guitar chords and eventually found that I was playing those chords a lot more than I was messing with the software. And I fell in love with the guitar, and I never looked back. It really did sort of become my passion. Now, that's not to say that I turned my back on software completely. I was using a lot of software simulators that gave you the feel and sound of playing with equipment. And I played through those for a long time. And there are a lot of simulators that do a really great job of really recreating the sound of hardware. And part of the bundled software package that I got a hold of was an Orange Amp sound bundle. And I fell in love with the sounds that the Orange Amps gave and became obsessed. That it really did sort of become an obsession. I wanted the Orange Amp sound. I was more than content to play through software for a long time because it really does give you a great sound. And for any bedroom musicians out there who are doing home recording or garage recording, taking it all back to garage bands. Anybody who's doing garage recording out there and needs to play at a reasonable level, that's a really good way to record these loud, obnoxious, abrasive guitar sounds without bugging your neighbors. The volume levels are really constrained, but it really does have a true feel of a native hardware amp. And there are a lot of licensed brands and gear out there that have associated themselves with these software products. Full Tone, for example, MXR. I mean, anybody who knows gear, who knows pedals, who knows the hardware equipment, you know these names and you know that they're iconic when it comes to tone. And these companies have associated their names with these software brands. So you know they wouldn't do that. Fender, for example. Fender is legendary in guitar tone. They're not going to assign their brand name to a product if it's an inferior product. So the fact that they've associated their brand name with a product like Amplitube speaks volumes to the quality of this software. It sounds great. It really is amazing. So if you can't afford thousands of dollars worth of amps and cabinets and pedals, to quote Don Roland, it's the sound that's in your head and you're trying to get that. And these products definitely allow you to do that. But on some level, I became sort of obsessed with having the real thing. And a few years ago, Orange came out with the Micro Terror. It was very affordable. It's in the family of lunchbox amp heads, which are very small, very compact, and very utilitarian. And most importantly, at least to me, very affordable. And the MSRP on the Micro Terror was $149 American, I believe, which for an Orange amp is amazingly affordable. And it turns out that this little tiny lunchbox amp pumps out 20 watts. So that tiny little amp head will push a 4x12 cabinet. Now that's enough volume to fill out a really, really good sized club. And if you're running a mic through the PA, it will serve you in any venue. So this is a great value for a really powerful amp with a tiny footprint at a really affordable price. So when I saw that that was being offered, I had to get it. So I grabbed that, and that was sort of the threshold that I crossed into the world of hardware. So I was playing with that for a while, running it through simulated cabinets via my laptop. And then I found that there was a matched cabinet that went with that. It was perfectly paired for that Micro Terror. So I felt compelled to pick that up as well. So I grabbed that. And to be honest, at a completely modest volume, actually modest is an understatement. At a very low volume, it is almost unsustainable in a comfortable household or bedroom environment. It's really, to state it plainly, it's really fucking loud. I've never used it at its full volume. In the space I'm in, the volume that the rooms I'm in can handle, it's too loud even for that. And so now I had dipped my toes into hardware and was still running. I was running a fairly complex system with effects coming out of my laptop into the amp head, out of the cabinet, into a microphone, back into a recording PC system. And it was getting fairly complicated, but it was doable. And I liked the sound that I was getting from all that. And then I decided that if the simulated distortion sound that I was getting sounded that good, how much better could an actual big muff Pi Nano sound? So I started doing a little research and found one for a very affordable price, and the sound was amazing. And at that point, I decided that my goal was to build a garage rock pedal board, and so I started doing research. And I got my dream pedal board. The Les Paul and the SG were the holy grails. And I have both those. The SG is the guitar that Tony Iommi plays. So, I mean, that was the one. Black Sabbath is the one. All the bands that I listen to that really inform me and really inspire me, if you trace them all back, they go back to Black Sabbath. And Tony Iommi, the legendary guitarist for Black Sabbath, plays an SG. You know, I'm not the hugest AC/DC fan, but a lot of people do consider them sort of the penultimate rock and roll band. And Angus Young plays an SG. So the SG is not a bad horse to back in that race. So eventually to get an SG, which was my second guitar and was my first real guitar, the first guitar in my collection that I got specifically for its sound, not as an effects trigger, not as just something to manipulate delays or reverbs or phasers, but because I love the sound of that SG. That was my first. And I've gotten a couple since then, and I play them frequently. I do, and I love them. I love my Les Paul. But the guitar I gravitate to the most, and the one I end up picking up the most often, is my SG. And you would think that the one you had the longest and the one that you had sort of played the most, the novelty would wear off the soonest on that. But it's not the case. That one feels like home. That's my lady. And I love her. Wow, that was kind of an impassioned little tangent to go on about guitars, but it was actually quite heartfelt. I meant every word of that. Dude, that's not cool, man. You don't laugh at somebody when they're laying their soul bare and like being real.
What a prick.
And again, man, not cool. Not cool at all.
I should know that, but I don't.
I know you didn't mean it. I know you're tired. I know
I'm completely naked.
That's not what I was going to say. And I thought I asked you to put some fucking pants on. What I was going to say was, I know you're tired. I know it's the end of the episode. It's been a long haul.
Roger that.
And we're heading towards the home stretch on this one. But I think it went well. I mean, I think we did a good job considering this was your first podcast and
moving forward.
Yeah. Moving forward, we'll do these again, and it'll be fun. It'll be great. And once we get used to this, it won't be nearly as
I
exhausting.
just need to lay down.
Yeah, I know. We're gonna go lay down in a minute. I'll tuck you in. You'll be fine. We just got a couple more minutes. But before we go, I do need to just say that if you want to check us out on social media, all of our social media links are at the top of AnvilHammerHatchet.com. There's links right at the top of the page for our Instagram, our Twitter, our Facebook page, our YouTube channel where you can stream all the episodes, the RSS feed if you just want to click and subscribe, and that way the episodes, when they get posted, they'll just show up in your feed. And there's a link to our Google Voice number, so if you want to leave us a voicemail and mention any topics that you want us to discuss, whether it's me and Army and Big Daddy Ross, or just me and Clarmy.
Hello.
Hey, Clarmy, you don't have to say hello every time we mention your name. Everybody knows you're here. You're doing a really, really good job, buddy. I really appreciate
I
it.
should know that, but I don't.
You'll get used to it. If you want to follow us, if you want to get in touch, if you want to send a message to Clarmy, if you want to send him a voicemail or an email at AnvilHammerHatchet@gmail.com, there's a link at the top of our website to the email. Just let Clarmy know what a good job he's doing. He's in need of all that encouragement. As a young guy coming up, he needs all the encouragement and help
I'm
he can get.
completely naked.
You're not helping, Clarmy. Anyway, follow us on social media. More episodes are coming up in the future. Should be back in the studio with the boys next week. We've got guests coming up. We're working on doing some bookings right now that are really, really exciting. So look forward to those. Look forward to me getting back in the studio with Army. The real Army. And of course, with Big Daddy Ross, the boss's boss, the man with the plan who knows where to stand, because he'll be back in the studio with us soon. But in the meantime, I have been Chris. He has been Clarmy.
Hello.
You should say goodbye right now, Clarmy.
I should know that, but I don't.
You did a good job, buddy. Let's just leave it at that. Thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to me and Clarmy. I know it's been a rough one. It's been a weird one.
Hello.
Clarmy, you don't have to say hello every time you hear your name.
What a prick.
Dude, that's not cool, man. Fucking with me like that's not funny, dude. You shouldn't do that.
Roger that.
I gotta say, it was kind of fun, though. What were you doing on the break again? Jesus, are you kidding me, dude? You gotta take it easy, man. You really do.